My name is Arthur, and I'm 62 years old. For most of my life, I lived by a simple code, one I thought was infallible. Work hard, love your family with every fiber of your being, and everything else will fall into place. I truly believed love was a fortress, an impenetrable shield I was building around the people who mattered most. But on a day meant for joy and togetherness, I discovered a devastating truth. Sometimes the very people you build the fortress for are the ones who smuggle the Trojan horse inside. Before I tell you the whole story, how a beautifully wrapped Christmas gift became a weapon that demolished my world only to, in the strangest way, save me, I'd appreciate it if you took a moment. Go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button, and maybe drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from tonight. There's a comfort in knowing who you're sharing your story with. It all began on Christmas morning, a day that held an almost sacred reverence in our family. My late wife, Helen, had adored Christmas, and in the 5 years since her passing, I had dedicated myself to preserving her traditions with an almost religious fervor. The house, her dream house, was filled with the scent of a fresh-cut pine tree that was, as she would have insisted, a foot too tall for the living room. The air was thick with the comforting aroma of cinnamon rolls and the slow-roasting ham that had been in the oven since dawn. My daughter, Lily, was a whirlwind of activity in the kitchen, her cheerful laughter a constant melody, accompanied by the excited squeals of my grandchildren, 6-year-old Chloe and 8-year-old Noah. From the outside looking in, we were the quintessential happy family, a postcard of holiday bliss. But the truth is, the foundation of that beautiful picture was rotting from within, and the floor was about to give way. You have to understand, the house wasn't just wood and nails to me. It was the physical embodiment of Helen's spirit. We had spent our entire lives being practical, saving every spare dollar, deferring our dreams for another day. After I lost her to a swift and cruel illness, I felt adrift. Taking our life savings and buying this house was the one thing that felt right. It was a grand 2-story colonial with a sprawling green lawn for the kids to run on, nestled in a quiet suburb with the best schools in the state. I didn't buy it for myself. My needs were simple. I bought it for Lily and her husband, Mark. I wanted to give them the solid start Helen and I never had, a bedrock of security so they wouldn't have to struggle the way we did. I put down a down payment so large it made the bank manager's eyes water, and I paid the hefty mortgage every single month without fail. The deed, however, remained solely in my name. This was the one piece of advice from Helen that I had heeded. "He's charming, Arthur," she'd told me one evening long ago, watching Mark hold court at a family barbecue. "Almost too charming. Promise me you'll always protect what's ours, for Lily's sake, just in case." I thought she was being overly cautious, but Helen had a way of seeing the core of a person. I promised, and I kept that promise. My living arrangement seemed perfect. I occupied the guest suite on the first floor, giving them the entire upstairs. I was more than a landlord. I was a built-in support system. I was Grandpa on call, the resident handyman for leaky faucets and squeaky doors, the meticulous gardener who kept Helen's rose bushes blooming, and the unpaid babysitter who allowed Lily and Mark to have their date nights. I invested every ounce of my energy and a significant portion of my retirement fund into that home, naively believing I was weaving myself inextricably into the fabric of their family. Mark, my son-in-law, was a master of superficial charm. He'd greet me with a firm handshake and a clap on the shoulder, calling me a lifesaver or the rock of this family. He was a real estate agent who excelled at selling the illusion of success. He drove a gleaming black BMW that I knew was leased and wore tailored suits that cost more than my monthly pension check, while contributing next to nothing to the household expenses. I saw the way his eyes would greedily scan the room when they hosted parties, soaking in the admiration from guests for his beautiful home and his successful life. I saw the subtle ways he would dismiss Lily's ideas with a condescending chuckle, or the way his smile was a perfect polished veneer that never, ever reached his eyes. I pushed those observations down, burying them under the hope that I was wrong. I ignored the red flags because Lily, my precious daughter, seemed happy, and her happiness was the only currency that mattered to me. But on that Christmas morning, the air itself felt different, charged with a strange, unspoken tension. Mark was unusually subdued, clutching a mug of coffee like a shield and staring blankly at the glittering tree. Lily, in contrast, was almost painfully cheerful. Her smile was stretched a little too tight, her laughter a fraction too loud. It was the kind of forced joy that signals a deep-seated panic. We all gathered in the living room, the floor a vibrant sea of discarded wrapping paper. The children's faces were alight with pure, unadulterated joy, and for a fleeting moment, the tension dissipated, and everything felt normal. I handed out my presents, a dollhouse for Chloe, a complex Lego set for Noah, a spa certificate for Lily. Then, Lily approached me, holding a small, exquisitely wrapped box tied with a shimmering gold ribbon.
"This one's for you, Dad," she said, and I noticed the slight tremor in her voice. I took the box from her. It felt impossibly light. "Oh, sweetheart, you shouldn't have," I said, my heart swelling with love for her. I imagined it held a new watch, perhaps, or tickets to a baseball game. I carefully slid the ribbon off and lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of pristine white tissue paper, was not a gift, but a thick sheaf of official-looking documents, folded neatly. I lifted them out, a knot of confusion tightening in my stomach. My eyes scanned the header on the top page, and the festive sounds of the room dissolved into a dull, distant roar. Petition for dissolution of marriage. My head snapped up, my eyes searching for hers. "What is this?" I managed to ask, my voice a strangled whisper. Tears immediately welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. She couldn't meet my gaze, her focus fixed on an imaginary spot on the Persian rug. They're from Mark, Dad," she stammered, her words tumbling out in a rush. He said he didn't have the courage to face you himself." Divorce papers? Why was she the one giving me Mark's divorce papers? And then, as if the initial blow wasn't enough, she unsheathed the dagger and drove it home. "We're getting divorced," she sobbed, finally forcing herself to look at me, her face a crumpled mask of misery. "And he wants the house. He says his name is on all the utility bills, and he's established residency. His lawyer says that gives him a strong claim. We need you to move out, Dad. He says it's the only way we can settle this without a messy fight." We. That single, two-letter word was an act of profound violence. Not he needs you to move out. We. My daughter, my Lily, the child I had rocked to sleep and taught to ride a bike, was standing there on Christmas morning in the very house I had bought for her, the house I paid for, the house I maintained, telling me to get out. The air was vacuumed from my lungs. I looked past her and my gaze locked with Mark's. He had finally emerged from the shadows of the hallway where he'd been lurking. He stood there, arms crossed, not with a look of apology or sadness, but with an expression of cold, hard defiance. He was the puppeteer, and he had just forced his wife to sever the strings to her own father. My heart felt like it had been flash frozen, a block of ice in my chest. A primal scream built in my throat. I wanted to rage, to shake her and ask her how she could betray me, betray the memory of her mother for this hollow, manipulative man. But I didn't. In that moment of absolute, soul-crushing devastation, Helen's voice, clear as a bell, echoed in the chambers of my mind. "Protect what's ours, Arthur. just in case. All my years of quiet diligence, of careful planning, of gut feelings I'd pushed aside, it all coalesced into a single point of cold, hard clarity. I had always known, on some level, that I needed a contingency plan. I just never, in my worst nightmares, imagined the threat would come from my own flesh and blood. I didn't utter a single word. I simply, methodically, folded the legal papers and placed them back in their elegant box. I rose to my feet, my legs feeling like they belonged to a stranger, and walked past my daughter, past my son-in-law, who actually flinched as I approached him. I walked toward the magnificent Christmas tree, the radiant symbol of the beautiful lie we had all been living. Tucked away behind the lower branches, almost hidden from view, was one last gift. It was a plain, unassuming manila envelope. This was supposed to be my grand surprise. I was going to give them the deed, fully signed over, making the home truly and finally theirs. I had imagined their tears of joy, the culmination of my life's work to provide for them. The irony was a bitter pill. I retrieved the envelope. The paper felt cool and substantial in my trembling hands. I turned and walked back to Lily, who was now weeping uncontrollably, her forced holiday cheer having completely disintegrated. Mark had placed an arm around her, a gesture that looked less like comfort and more like a guard staking his claim. I held the envelope out. Lily looked up, her tear-streaked face a canvas of confusion. "What's this, Dad?" I met her gaze directly, my own eyes dry, my voice steady and devoid of the hurricane of emotion that was tearing me apart. "That, sweetheart, is the deed to this house. The deed that is and has always been in my name." I saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes morph into dawning horror. Beside her, Mark's smug mask of confidence began to crack. "And inside," I continued, my voice dropping to a low, calm, deliberate tone that cut through the room, "you will also find a copy of the listing agreement I signed with a real estate agent last week. The house went on the market yesterday. The for sale sign goes up on the front lawn tomorrow morning. Merry Christmas."
I didn't wait to witness the explosion. I turned my back on them, walked to the hall closet, and put on my coat. I grabbed the small duffel bag I had packed weeks prior, a nagging, persistent premonition having urged me to prepare for an unnamed disaster. As I opened the front door and stepped out into the biting cold of Christmas Day, leaving behind the smoking ruins of the life I thought I had, I didn't feel defeated. I felt a strange, chilling clarity. They had made a declaration of war, and they had absolutely no idea that I was already prepared for battle. The ensuing silence, I imagined, was more deafening than any shouting could ever be. It was the sound of a carefully curated world shattering into a million pieces. I didn't look back as I pulled the door shut behind me, but the scene played out in my mind's eye. Lily staring at the manila envelope as if it were a bomb, and Mark, his face a kaleidoscope of disbelief, incandescent rage, and finally the cold, creeping tendrils of panic. The self-proclaimed king of the castle had just been forcefully reminded that he was, and had always been, a guest. I got into my car and just drove, the engine a low hum against the sudden silence of my life. I didn't have a destination, only an urgent, primal need to put physical distance between myself and that house, which now felt less like a home and more like a crime scene. My phone, which I'd tossed on the passenger seat, began its relentless buzzing. First Lily's name flashed on the screen, then an unknown number I knew belonged to Mark. I let them both go to voicemail. I drove to a scenic overlook, a quiet park where Helen and I used to walk our old dog, and I sat there for hours, watching the winter sun bleed across the sky. The pain was a physical entity,
a crushing weight on my chest that made each breath a conscious effort. It was never about the house, not really. It was about the betrayal, the casual cruelty of their timing, the use of the word we. That word would echo in my thoughts for a very long time. Yet, underneath the crushing waves of grief, something else was beginning to form, a bedrock of resolve. For years, I had happily played the role of the quiet, accommodating, ever-present support system, the man in the background who made their comfortable life possible and asked for nothing. That version of Arthur Evans had ceased to exist the moment he walked out that door. Now I had to become the man Helen had always known I was capable of being, strong, pragmatic, and unwilling to suffer fools. My contingency plan, born of quiet worry months ago, was now my salvation. The subtle signs, Mark's increasingly ostentatious purchases, Lily's prickly defensiveness whenever I gently probed about their finances, the hushed, tense arguments I'd overhear after they thought I was asleep, had painted a picture of instability I could no longer ignore. Following the advice of a lawyer I had consulted discreetly, I had rented a small furnished apartment in a modern building across town. It was an anonymous, sterile place, a financial safety net I had prayed I would never need. That's where I went. The key felt cold and foreign in my hand as I opened the door to my new life. It was empty and silent, but it was mine. It was safe. The next day, a Tuesday, the for sale sign was hammered into the perfectly manicured lawn of Helen's dream house, just as I'd promised. It was a bold, public declaration that I would not be intimidated, I would not be erased. The barrage of calls and texts intensified into a digital siege. Lily's messages were a torrent of tears, apologies, and pleading. Mark's were a blustering mix of fury and legal threats, filled with jargon he'd clearly copied and pasted from a website. He accused me of being a cruel, vindictive old man, of callously making his children homeless. The sheer hypocrisy of it all was breathtaking. I immediately retained the lawyer I had previously consulted, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Carol Davies. She listened to the whole sordid story, reviewed the deed and my mortgage statements, and a grim smile played on her lips. "Mr. Evans," she said, her voice crisp and confident, "they are swimming in a sea of emotional blackmail with not so much as a legal life raft. You own the property outright. You have shouldered the entire financial burden of ownership. Their claim is based on nothing more than audacity and entitlement. Let them make all the noise they want. We will proceed with the sale as planned." And we proceeded, we did. The real estate agent began scheduling showings. The reality that their idyllic subsidized life had an expiration date began to dawn on them. The beautiful trap they had so carefully constructed for me had sprung shut, but they were the ones caught inside. The inevitable turning point came about 2 weeks after that fateful Christmas. I was in my new kitchen, trying to decipher the cryptic symbols on my new coffee maker, when my phone rang. It was Lily. This time her voice wasn't just pleading or apologetic, it was shattered. "Dad," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "Mark, he left." I remained silent, giving her the space to let it all out.
When he finally understood you weren't going to give in, that the house was really being sold, he changed, Dad. He became so mean. He said I was useless, that I had failed to secure our future. His words. He said he wasn't going to stick around to live in some dumpy apartment just because I couldn't control my own father. She took a ragged breath. He packed his designer suitcases this morning and just left. The kids keep asking where he is. I don't know what to tell them. I don't know what to do. The parasite had detached from its host. The charming provider, the loving husband, had revealed himself to be nothing more than a shallow opportunist who had fled the moment the well ran dry. A dark, grim part of me felt a sliver of vindication, but it was quickly consumed by the raw pain in my daughter's voice. She had made a terrible, foolish mistake, but she was still my Lily.
"Where are you right now?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. "I'm still at the house," she whispered. "The realtor is coming with a family for a showing in an hour." In that moment, I faced a critical choice. I could have been cold, clinical. I could have said, "This is the consequence of your actions." But looking at the small framed photo of Helen on my new empty mantelpiece, I knew that wasn't the way forward. This was never about punishment. It was about teaching a lesson in strength and self-respect. "All right, sweetheart," I said calmly, my own resolve solidifying. "Listen to me very carefully. Cancel the showing. Tell the agent there's been a family emergency. Then pack a bag for you and the kids, just the essentials. I'm coming to get you." The house sold within a month. It was a beautiful property in a prime location, and it sparked a minor bidding war. After paying the capital gains taxes and realtor fees, I was left with a substantial sum of money. It was the nest egg Helen and I had so painstakingly built over 40 years, now returned to me under the most painful of circumstances. I didn't let Lily and the kids move in with me. It would have been too easy to fall back into the old, unhealthy dynamic. Instead, I used a portion of the proceeds to help her find a modest, respectable townhouse for rent in a good school district, something I knew she could eventually afford on her own. I paid the security deposit and the first 3 months' rent to give her a buffer. "This is a hand up, Lily, not a hand out," I told her firmly but gently. "The rest is up to you now." The transition was brutal for her. She had to learn to budget, to shop for groceries with coupons, to live without the myriad of small luxuries she had always taken for granted. She found a job as a receptionist at a busy pediatrician's office. It wasn't glamorous and the pay was modest, but it was a start. It was hers. And slowly, painstakingly, I watched my daughter begin to build a life, not on a foundation of someone else's generosity, but on her own nascent strength and resilience. As for me, I discovered a profound sense of freedom I hadn't realized I'd been missing. I bought a sleek, modern condo for myself in a new development downtown, with a balcony that had a stunning view of the city skyline and no lawn to mow. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected, joined a hiking club that met every Saturday, and started traveling. I finally took that trip to the Amalfi Coast that Helen and I had always talked about, and I felt her with me with every step. I learned that my identity was not solely defined by the roles of dad and grandpa. My name was Arthur, and Arthur had a life of his own to live. Our relationship, Lily's and mine, began to heal, but it was forged anew in a different fire. The blind, childlike adoration was gone, replaced by a more mature, hard-won respect. We no longer lived in each other's pockets. We had dinner once a week. I had the grandkids over on weekends, and our time together felt more precious and meaningful. There were boundaries now, unspoken but clear, and they made our relationship healthier. She was learning to be a daughter, not a dependent, and I was learning to be a father, not an enabler. 1 year later, on Christmas Day, I was sitting on the balcony of my condo, a cup of coffee in hand, watching the snow gently blanket the city. My tree was smaller, the pile of presents modest, but the sense of peace was immeasurable. Lily and the kids came over in the afternoon. There was no tension, no forced cheer. She handed me a small wrapped gift. I opened it. It was a simple silver frame holding a photo of the 4 of us, taken on a recent hike in the mountains. We all looked genuinely, effortlessly happy. She said, "I'm so sorry, Dad, for everything." "I know you are," I replied. And I knew it to be true. Looking back, that Christmas morning was the single worst day of my life. But in a strange and unexpected way, it was also the most liberating. Mark and Lily, in their greed and desperation, tried to take my house, a structure of wood, plaster, and nails. But what they did instead was force me to tear down the facade of my own life and rebuild it on a stronger, more authentic foundation. They gave me back my freedom, my identity, and ultimately a healthier, more honest relationship with my daughter than I ever thought possible. They tried to leave me with nothing, and in the end, they gave me back everything that truly mattered. And that, I've learned, is a gift no amount of money can ever buy.